Good evening. It's a fine Sunday night to be learning Torah together. That was Eitan Katz singing B'Shem Hashem, in the name of God, from his album Live in Jerusalem, Volume 2. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us as we get a little Torah learning in on the fourth night of Hanukkah? This is a very blessed night. I've been sharing each night on the main page of Accidental Talmudist that each night of Hanukkah has its own special power. It's like its own spiritual power, and there's particular things to pray for on each night. The fourth night is connected to the four matriarchs, to Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So it's a time with a special power for women to pray, to be whole within their four walls, to be a woman of truth and authenticity. Their women have that special power, to have that prayer answered, so they can pray on behalf of other people, whether men or women. And you can pray for women. I mean, it's just, we're really pulling in that spiritual energy from the imamot, from the matriarchs. Who's with us tonight as we do some learning? Yehudit in South Carolina is first. Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, James in Indianapolis, Pauline in Arkansas, John in Sedona, Timothy also in Arizona, Sharon in New Jersey, Ace in California, Hannah in Mississippi, Ann in California, Renee in Indianapolis in saying Hag Sameach, Irene in Oregon, Gloria in Dallas, Paco Gomez in El DF de Mexico. Welcome, Paco. Leanne in California, Donna in Bahama, North Carolina, Bill in Arkansas. Paco's tagging his buddy Nico in Israel. Tom saying shalom. And Renee saying Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be his will. Also over there, let's see. Yeah, on the YouTube side, Lynn with us in North Texas. Brandon is saying happy Hanukkah. Neil with us in Virginia. And Sheila in Montana. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's class is dedicated, a big Yasher Koach, to AJ Stern here in Los Angeles. And he is dedicating in honor of myself and Nina and the Accidental Talmudist team that we should continue to share Torah with the world. We honor and thank you, AJ, and may you and your whole family be blessed with tremendous prosperity, good health, sweetness, meaning, and all good things. May the blesser be blessed. And we say Amen. If you'd like to dedicate an episode, this is a great time to do it. We're in our annual campaign. Nina will put the link in the comments. Donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. And the information is there. We are holding... this is Daf Chaf Beis. That's page 22 of Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud. We're studying the laws of Passover. We're in chapter 2, continuing our discussion of the first Mishna of chapter 2. Recall from yesterday that we're discussing this idea that the chametz, the leaven, which needs to be removed from the possession of a Jew before Passover begins, and in fact before the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. Passover begins that night, the 15th of Nisan. On the afternoon, already the bread all leaven products and bread have to be removed from our possession. And as we've learned, the sages decreed that in the 6th hour of the day, basically about 11 a.m. in the morning, anything that we haven't already sold to a non-Jew now needs to be destroyed. Usually it's done by burning, but we also learned that it could be done by crumbling and scattering in the wind or into the ocean. Our Mishnah that we're studying now is basically teaching that for as long as our chametz is permitted to be eaten, and we saw that in the fourth hour is the last time that the average Jew is permitted to eat chametz, leaven products, on the morning before Passover begins. But a Kohen, there's one more hour. In the fifth hour, the Kohen, the priests, can still eat their teruma, the leaven that's set aside and consecrated for the use of the priests, they can still eat it in that last hour. And as long as at least some Jew is permitted, in this case the Kohanim, the priests, as long as they are permitted to eat, we are still, the rest of us, permitted, even though we're not permitted to eat it, we can still derive benefit from the chametz, meaning we can still sell it to a non-Jew, or we can feed it to our animals. And that's the ruling from yesterday's Mishna that we discussed. And as yesterday was closing, we were talking, the Gemara is exploring, so how do we know that, where do we get this law that as long as it's permitted to eat it, it's permitted to derive benefit, and when it becomes prohibited to eat it, it is also prohibited to derive benefit, right? So it's different to derive benefit than to eat. Eat means I'm going to ingest it, it's going to go into my body. Benefit could include that I'm going to sell it and get money for it, or even I'm going to give it as a gift, and I'm going to get the value of giving a gift, the goodwill that comes from giving a gift. Excuse me. Also, that I could feed my animals. Obviously, that is a benefit to me. If I own animals on a farm, for example, and I'm using this leavened bread to feed the animals, I get benefit from it. So from where in the Torah is it derived that when it's prohibited to eat, it is also prohibited to derive benefit? There was some dispute about that yesterday, but the position with which we're moving forward was Rabbi Abahu's, who said that in the Torah, wherever it is mentioned that one shall not eat something, whatever the something is, it goes along with that it is prohibited to benefit from this thing that is prohibited to eat, unless the Torah makes a specific dispensation that we are allowed to benefit from it. So in the absence of any other language which permits us to benefit from it, if the Torah simply says one shall not eat such and such thing, such and such food, then it is also implied that we cannot benefit from it. And we were learning yesterday that is based on the law of the nevela, the carcass of a kosher animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. Right, so if you can think about a sheep or a goat or a cow, these are kosher animals, even a chicken, and they need to be slaughtered by a shochet, right, by a kosher butcher that's trained in proper slaughter, who says a blessing, uses a very sharp knife, makes a very clean, sharp cut, and then all the blood is drained from the animal, the lifeblood is drained out of it. And then that meat would be permitted to a Jew. But if the animal is killed in some other way, slaughtered by a non-kosher butcher, or killed by a hunter, killed by accident, died of disease, any other kind of death except a proper kosher slaughter will render this a prohibited carcass, right? That we are not allowed to eat it. But the Torah said that when you have such a carcass, such a nevela, it is permitted to, and then it was a little unclear, and then the sages argued, what can we do with it? Basically, the law came out that we can give it to a Noahide in our midst, right? So this is somebody that comes to live in the Holy Land among the Jewish people, and is going to obey, follow the Noahide laws, the 7 Noahide laws. So to that person, we can give it. In fact, it's encouraged to give it. We could sell it if we want to such a person. Maybe they're wealthy and don't need a gift, but we can give or sell, or we can sell it. And there's not that choice. It must be sold, not gifted, to a nochri, right? So somebody who's following a different religion, sometimes translated as a Gentile, sometimes translated other ways, but basically somebody who's following another religion and not necessarily submitting to the Noahide laws. What are the Noahide laws? This is going to come up again today, so it's worth mentioning here. There are 7 Noahide laws. They sound simple. They're actually big categories of law. And the sages teach in Tractate Sanhedrin of the Talmud, which we'll come to much later in our 7.5-year journey, that that Jews and non-Jews, everyone, has the potential to have a place in the world to come, and you would only lose your place in the world to come, through egregious transgressions. So you don't need, according to the Jewish faith, you don't need to be a Jew to have a place in the world to come. But you do need to follow the Noahide laws. And what are they? Number one, to know God. To know God. K-N-O-W. And that's just a huge, huge requirement, right? It doesn't just mean that you would say with your lips, yeah, I agree, there's one God in the world and God created the world. That's a great start. But to know God, to know about God, to be interested in God, to want to know more about God, to relate to God, to be in relationship with God, all those things are part of the first commandment, which is, Noahide means that it's given to all the children of Noah, meaning all of humanity, right? So all of humanity is commanded to know God. And how do you know God? So by coming to a class like this, you're learning about God, you're learning about Torah, you're learning about what our tradition has been saying for 3,000 years since the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, and God's presence was made known in the world. Number two, do not blaspheme. Number three, do not murder. Do not steal. Do not engage in sexual immorality. Do not eat a limb cut from a living animal. It seems like, who wouldn't do that? I mean, who would want to do that? It sounds awful. Who would cut a limb off a living animal to eat it? But this category, like all these laws, are categories that require much more further study. This, cruelty to animals is going to be included in this category. But we're going to specifically talk today about not eating a limb cut from a living animal. And the seventh Noahide law is to establish a just legal system, to have courts of law, and to have a law-abiding society. That is a commandment given to all of humanity. And when you live in a lawless society, then all of that society is actually, unfortunately, in a state of transgression, because you can't have a lawless society. It just doesn't work, and it doesn't work for humans, and it is against God's will. Okay, so let's get back here. Right, so the point was, you can't eat the nevela. A Jew can't eat the nevela. He can gift it to a Noahide or sell it, right, to a nochri, to a non-Jew that's practicing some other religion, which is maybe inconsistent with the Noahide laws. Okay, so that's what we learned yesterday. And now on today's daf, on today's page, the Gemara is going to look at a few more sources, a few more commandments in the Torah where it says do not eat some food, and that we're going to learn out from that not only can we not eat it, but we're not allowed to benefit from it, right? So we're looking for further evidence in our tradition that when God dictated the Torah to Moses and commanded the Jewish people, when God says you shall not eat such and such, it means you won't eat it and you won't benefit from it unless I give you permission specifically through some other means, either spell it out or at least in a way that's clear enough that it can be inferred that you can benefit from it in some way. So the Gemara is going to look at several instances like that, and then in the second half of today's page, we come to a law, which is this one that I'm mentioning, the seventh of the Noahide laws, that you shall not eat a limb torn from a living animal. Now, what's interesting about that is that's the way we always word it, but that's not what the Torah actually says. The Torah doesn't say, thou shalt not eat a limb torn from a living animal. What the Torah actually says, it's this law that's being taught. But the way that it is worded, this is at Deuteronomy 12:23, and it says, "And only be steadfast in not eating the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life with the flesh." That's the verse that teaches you shall not eat a limb torn from a living animal. So we've seen it here and in a few other places that we don't eat the blood. It is prohibited, absolutely prohibited for a Jew to eat blood, right? So, and it's specifically what the blood means is we can't eat anything from an animal unless it's slaughtered properly. So it has to be a kosher slaughter. And when it is slaughtered, the blood pours out of the jugular that's been cut. So that's the life blood, right? The blood that gushes out and what leaves the animal with that blood is the animal's life. So the animal has given up its life so that we may eat it. And we cannot eat any of that blood. Obviously, some blood is going to remain in the meat. I mean, when you cook a steak on the grill, you see that some blood comes to the surface. You can't get every drop of blood out of the meat, but that's just kind of like the residual blood. The blood that leaves the animal and with it the life of the animal drains out. That blood may not be eaten. None of it, not at all. What are we supposed to do? Elsewhere it's commanded, you shall pour it out on the ground like water, right? And then you'll cover it up for the sake of the dignity of the animal. But here, so these two ideas are juxtaposed together. Be steadfast in not eating the blood. It's almost like, why do we have to be so steadfast? Who's sitting around going, oh, I really want to eat blood? But perhaps in the ancient world, that was like considered an important food, a delicacy, and maybe all the other peoples around the Jews at that time were eating the blood. But God said to the Jews, no, you cannot eat the blood. You're going to be different. You can't do that. And not only that, you shall not eat the life with the flesh. And the life with the flesh, right? The life, in other words, if you cut a limb off a living animal, it will probably kill the animal. And so you did it while it was alive. I mean, it's just extra cruelty. And then you eat it. It's just not permitted. Not at all permitted. Okay. So it says you shall not eat. However, so you would think that also teaches that, okay, you can't eat a limb cut from a living animal, and therefore you can't benefit a limb eaten from a living animal, and we don't need it to be told to us that we can't benefit from it, unless we're told that we can benefit from it. Now we have a baraisa which says, Rabbi Nassan teaches, from where is it derived that a person may not offer a cup of wine to a nazir? So a nazir is somebody who has taken a vow not to drink or benefit from grapes, right? So this is a person who's not going to eat grapes, he's not going to eat raisins, he's not going to eat wine vinegar, and he's certainly not going to drink wine or brandy, right? That's the Nazirite, or in Hebrew, the Nazir. So from where is it derived that, well, that guy's a Nazir, okay, it's his business that he took a vow not to drink wine. From where is it derived that I violate a prohibition, a negative commandment, if I offer wine to the Nazir, or if I offer a limb cut from a living animal to a Noahide, right? So these two actions are compared to each other. Offering wine to somebody who has vowed not to drink wine, or offering a limb cut from a living animal to a Noahide, somebody who has, acknowledged that God made the world, God runs the world, God has commanded all of humanity in these 7 commandments given to the children of Noah. One of them says, you shall not eat a limb cut from a living animal. So he can't eat it. No one can eat it. But why do I violate a transgression if I offer it to him? It makes sense that I shouldn't do it. But have I actually violated a law? And the answer is yes, I have. If I offer wine to one who has vowed not to drink, specifically a Nazir, if I offer a limb cut from a living animal to anybody, because everyone could be a Noahide, but it's certainly somebody who's taken on to be a Noahide, from where do we derive that I have transgressed? From the law, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind, right? So this is a very familiar phrase from the Hebrew Bible. You shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. And it is not just literal, right? That Okay, a blind person is walking by with his white cane, and you don't, shove something that he's going to literally trip over. But it has much more meaning than that. And particularly when we have been learning and studying and we maybe know something that somebody else doesn't know, then it is, it's our obligation, our duty to watch out for our sisters and brothers and not, and not make it, and not create not entrap them, as it were, not entrap them in a transgression, right? I mean, you can take this much further. And there's some pretty well-known rabbis who are teaching online that, that all rabbis have a responsibility, for example, to teach Shabbos. I mean, we are very much we have a big hug for everybody, and everybody is welcome, no matter what your religion or your level of observance. If you're a Jew, you should come here and learn and grow in wisdom, and we love having you here. But it might be considered putting a stumbling block before the blind if we never said, look, a Jew is obligated. If you're a Jew, yeah, you didn't sign up. You didn't sign there when you were born, but you were born a Jew. You're obligated to keep Shabbos. And, we say this all the time. Everyone who's ever gone to synagogue at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and many other times has heard that all our deeds are being inscribed in a book. Well, you can imagine that later, you'll be in the world of souls, you and all your friends, and you might be sitting around, not just reading the book, but watching the movie in full 3D experience, vision, of like every deed that you've done while you're here. Everything is fully recorded. And you can even experience it again. All the souls can experience it and ride around in your, body cam, as it were, to see the choices you made, right? And so when that time comes and you knew that you were supposed to do and you didn't do, okay, well, then there's going to be a reward for every good deed. And there's going to be accounting for every bad deed, right? We're going to both. It's all going to be there. It's all going to be part of the accounting at the end. And, you need to know that that's the way that it is. It's the afterlife, according to Judaism, is very non-binary. It's not just, good place, bad place. It's like infinite levels in the next world. And so there's a possibility, sort of like that calculation will be done for every individual, and you'll kind of end up just where you deserve to be. So every time you're learning Torah, it's a big merit, and it's going to push you along further up. Every mitzvah that you do, every mitzvah that you perform, every Shabbos that you observe. And if I didn't tell you that might be like putting a stumbling block before the blind. So I've told you. Now, the point is that if giving a limb cut from a living animal, that you don't offer it to a Noahide, because that would be like putting a stumbling block before the blind. Well, then it seems like we need that baraisa to tell us not to give the limb cut from a living animal to another person, because technically everybody's a Noahide. At least, everyone is commanded to be a Noahide. Not everybody, carries their life that way. Not everyone lives their life that way, but everyone is commanded to be a Noahide, to obey those 7 laws. So if already you shall not eat the life with the flesh, meaning you shall not eat a limb cut from a living animal, is already telling us that the benefit is also prohibited. Then why do we also have this baraisa that you can't give it, right? Because giving is also a form of benefiting when you're the one who gives it to someone. Hold on. Okay. And so then the Gemara will answer, no. This is a different situation, because actually the Torah tells us that the limb of a living animal is juxtaposed to the blood, right? So blood, you can't eat it, but you can benefit from it. And this is very interesting. You can't benefit, you can't eat the blood of a kosher slaughtered animal, but but benefit may be taken from it. And the example that's brought here is that, okay, so there's the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And if you were to look at an overhead view of Jerusalem and look, at the Temple Mount, so you would see basically that the Western Wall, right, which is the famous Kotel, the wall right now where all Jews go to pray. So that's kind of the outer retaining wall of the Temple Mount, but that's the western side of the temple complex. So if you were just to kind of go straight through that wall, you'd have to go much higher up. So then you would come to the back of the temple. And so the first thing you would kind of encounter if you're going like an X-ray through the back of the temple is you'd come to the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was held with the Ten Commandments in it, etc. And then you'd go further to the sanctuary, and then to the courtyard, and then to the kind of like the large courtyard where the altar was, the Mizbeach, where the offerings were brought, and where the slaughtering was done. Right, and so, for example, on Passover, when everyone was bringing these paschal offerings, when the temple stood, and they were all being slaughtered in the courtyard of the temple. Okay, so there were a lot of animals being slaughtered, and every day some animals were being slaughtered for animal sacrifices to be brought on the altar, and a lot of blood, which was not permitted to be eaten by anybody, drained out. Somebody asked a question about this a few days ago. So the blood would drain out from all that slaughtering, and it would go into kind of a drainage canal for this purpose. And then it would go out underneath the courtyard through pipe plumbing that had been built for this purpose. And it would go out into the Kidron Valley. So today, that's the valley between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives Cemetery. There's a valley there. So this stream would go out, and they would wash, of course, the courtyard floor. So there was water mixed with this blood from all the slaughter, and it would go out, in that stream and out into that valley and be carried away. Now, this water going out into the stream that had so much blood in it was actually very, it carries a lot of nutrient. Right? It turns out that blood, has what in it to be fertilizer. It can be used for crops, for planting. It's going to help. It can help plants grow if you use it correctly. So, was it permitted to use this mixture of blood and water that was emerging from the slaughtered offerings, emerging from the temple and going out into that Kidron Valley? The answer is it was a transgression to use that blood from the sacrifices of the temple mixed with water for your plants. It was a transgression if you didn't reimburse the temple for it. Right. So what was happening here is that this was the sort of the secondary, residue of the offerings. So it still had some holiness attached to it, and it was the property of the temple. That's called hekdesh. So if you appropriate anything that has been consecrated to your own use, that is a transgression. But in certain situations like that one, you can use it as long as you pay some money into the temple treasury. That's the kind of money that was used for the upkeep of the temple. It didn't go to any individual. It was just used for the ongoing maintenance of the temple. So if you wanted to use that water mixed with blood that came out of the temple precincts, for your farm, you could do that as long as you threw some money into the collection box of the holy temple, as it were. But the blood, as we see, was permitted for benefit, right? Somebody could benefit from it. Not the person who brought the offerings. It's not like he gets to keep it, but that blood could be used. It could never be eaten, but it could be used for some benefit, as it was kind of a waste product flowing out of the temple, but you had to reimburse the temple for it. And likewise, the limb of a living animal is juxtaposed to the blood, right? In this case, the blood of the offerings. And so it's not absolutely prohibited for benefit, and that's why you needed to have a rule to tell you, for example, that you can't give it to a Noahide, because you might have thought that you could gift it to someone, but you can't, right? Okay. Now, where am I? Okay, another prohibition has to do with an ox. So an ox that gored and killed a person, right? So you own oxen, and one of your horned oxen got away from you, and it killed a person. A terrible, terrible tragedy. So this is addressed by the Torah at Exodus 21:28, as the merciful one says. And if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and of its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be clear. So here we have a prohibition on eating an ox, the meat of an ox, that killed someone. Okay. Now, as later we'll study in our journey through the Talmud, we'll see that there's many laws that have to do with, there's two types of oxen, right? One is the innocuous ox, and the other is the habitual gorer. So if your ox was already prone to escape and become dangerous, and you didn't take measures to prevent that from happening, then you are guilty of some kind of murder, right? If you it's some kind of negligent homicide. But if you knew that you had a dangerous ox on your hands and you didn't do what was necessary to make sure it didn't hurt someone, then you would be culpable. But here we're not talking about the habitual gorer. We're talking about the innocuous ox, right? So this is an ox that no one had any reason to believe was dangerous, but somehow it got away and killed someone. Now, once it killed someone, you can say it's certainly not the owner's fault. And the ox, I mean, it's just a brute beast. Like, it didn't know that it was doing something wrong. It didn't have intent, to kill someone, perhaps. We don't know. Nevertheless, that ox is, it can't be permitted to live. Once an animal kills a human being, the life of a human is so much more sacrosanct than the life of an animal that it must be executed. How is it going to be executed? Through the punishment of stoning. Now, once we know that this ox, that because it killed a person, it's going to be executed and it's going to be stoned to death. So now we know that it's going to be a nevela, right? Once it's been killed, it's going to be a carcass. We know it can't be eaten by a Jew because it will not have been slaughtered properly. So why does the Torah also teach, and its flesh may not be eaten? Of its flesh it may not be eaten. We know it may not be eaten because it was stoned to death as punishment for killing a person. So why does the Torah have what seems to be a superfluous phrase, it shall not be eaten, when we would have known that it could not be eaten since it needed to be stoned to death? Hold on a second. Let me just look at my notes. So the first answer to that question is, well, the Torah is telling us it may not be eaten just in case somebody thought that once it was condemned to die, right, because witnesses came and testified that it was this ox that killed, that person, tragic accident. And so now this ox needs to be condemned to die. And its appropriate punishment is to be stoned to death. But before that sentence is carried out, somebody comes along and has it slaughtered by a kosher butcher. So you might have thought that then it could be eaten. The Torah is telling you no. Even if you slaughter it properly, it still cannot be eaten. It killed a person. It is not going to be allowed to live. And we're not going to be allowed to eat it. Okay. Now, from that, we know, okay, we're not allowed to eat the flesh of the ox that killed a person. How do we know that we're also not allowed to benefit from that meat, right? I mean, listen, an ox is a tremendous amount of meat. It is worth, today's money, many thousands of dollars. when you think about how much meat is actually in a full-size ox. And you're telling me that, okay, this person who owned it, the owner, that's already a big loss for him, that, his ox needs to be killed. That's a huge financial loss. Let's say it wasn't his fault. It was not foreseeable that he took the appropriate precautions. He did what he was supposed to do. It was not foreseeable. A person got killed. It's tragic. But now he's going to lose the ox, and he's not going to be able to get any money for that meat. It all just has to be disposed of. But how do we know that, okay, it can't be eaten, but maybe it could be sold? Maybe Jews can't eat it, but maybe he could sell it to non-Jews. How do we know that it's not going to be permitted for benefit? Now, we already have this principle that we've been studying that Rabbi Abahu said, if it says you can't eat, it means you can't benefit either. But what do we have here in our verse? It says specifically, and if an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be clear. Now, this last phrase, the owner of the ox shall be clear, this Hebrew word naki, seems to imply that, well, he'll be clear means he's not going to be prosecuted for negligent homicide. That's what it means, he'll be clear. But some of the sages are going to learn out from that phrase, shall be clear means, well, he's not going to be thrown in jail. He's not going to have to, compensate the family that lost a person, and be sued for that negligent homicide. But neither will he benefit, right? He's going to lose that ox, and shall be clear means he shall be clear of punishment and he shall be clear of reward. So he will not have any benefit from the ox. That meat may not be eaten and it may not be sold, right? So no benefit, no eating, and no benefit. Now, some sages disagree and say, well, no. What it means, shall be clear, is just that he's not going to have monetary liability. There are other liabilities that could be associated, even though you were innocent and you behaved as an ox owner, did what you were supposed to do. Nevertheless, your ox killed a person, and you are going to have some liability toward the survivors of the person who was killed, to their family. So those who say that line, he shall be clear, means he shall be clear of liability, how do they derive? Hold on a second. But we shall not be eaten, so we're not even... I'm sorry, hold on. And those who say, how do they, so the ones who say no liability, how do they derive that there's not going to be benefit? And specifically, the question that's going to come up is, how do they derive that not only you can't eat the meat and you can't sell the meat, but not only that, you can't even use the hide of the ox, right? You can't sell it to make leather jackets out of. How do we know that even that kind of benefit is going to be prohibited? Some say because the owner shall be clear, he cannot even benefit from that. Others say, no, that line teaches no financial liability toward the family of the deceased. If so, do they think that the hide can be used? No, they don't believe that, but they learn out that it is prohibited to sell the hide and get the benefit of the hide of the ox from a different place, where the verse says, and of its flesh shall not be eaten. And of its flesh shall not be eaten. Now, the way you say that in Hebrew is lo ya'achel. I'm sorry, let me just get this in front of me. Yeah, lo ya'achel es basro. Lo ya'achel es basro. It shall not be eaten. It shall not be eaten of its flesh. The thing is, in Hebrew, when you're saying you shall not eat its flesh, it shall not be eaten of its flesh, the of is not that important right here. But when you say you shall not eat its flesh, in Hebrew, the way that's worded is, you shall not be an eater of flesh, right? Of its flesh, in this case, its flesh. There is that possessive. But there's a word in between, which is S, or some pronounce it et, right? So aleph, taf. And that word et or s, depending on whether you're Ashkenaz or modern Hebrew pronunciation, has no meaning. It is a quirk of the Hebrew language that where you have a verb, like an action verb, a transitive verb, and a direct object, there's this word in between, s, which it doesn't change the meaning of the phrase. It's just necessary whenever you have, this action, this transitive verb, and a direct object. So there is no meaning associated with that word. It's just like a helper word in Hebrew grammar. But sometimes the sages will attach meaning to that word. And so the sages who say that the phrase, the owner of the ox shall be clear, meaning he won't be prosecuted, but he also won't benefit. But that's talking about his financial liability. When it comes to he shall not benefit by selling the hide, they learn that out from the S basro, right? You shall not eat its flesh, but in Hebrew, you shall not eat its flesh, right? And so that extra word that's stuck in, which doesn't really have meaning, but it's just necessary to connect two different kinds of words, nouns and verbs, in this situation, they're going to say that is because that's secondary to the flesh. It suggests that you can benefit from what is secondary to the flesh. What is secondary to the flesh of the cow? Its skin, its hide, the leather, right? And so that's where they're going to learn out that you can't benefit from the hide. And those who say that, well, we can't derive benefit from the hide from the phrase that the owner of the ox shall be clear, that he'll be clear, meaning he won't be prosecuted and he also won't benefit. What do they say about the S, right? The ET or the ES. What do they say about that helper word between the verb and the object? They say, we don't learn anything from it. It's just Hebrew grammar. We don't have to attach a meaning from it. Some sages do, some sages don't. So the sages who don't attach a meaning to it, they don't learn something out of it. It's just grammar. Okay, and then we have the tale of, and this is so beautiful, and this is where we're going to finish. So if you've got questions and comments, put them in there now. So it was taught in a baraisa that Shimon ha-Amasoni, and some say that it was Nehemiah ha-Amasoni, would interpret all occurrences of the word S in the Torah. Now, for example, we have that at the beginning of the Torah, the very beginning of the Bible, right? In the beginning of God's creating of the heaven and earth, God said, let there be light, right? Bereshit bara Elohim es hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz. In the beginning of God's creating the heaven and God's creating the earth, or God's creating the heaven and the earth. But it's es hashamayim, creating this word es and then heaven, and the s, and creating the earth. But again, it says the is and s is that helper word, haaretz, right? So whenever God is creating blank, creating heaven and creating earth, this word s gets stuck in between. So this sage, Shimon Hamasoni, and some say it was Nehemiah Hamasoni, he went through the whole Torah. From that's the first line, and those are the first two uses of this helper word S. And then he went through the whole Torah, and every time S came up, he said, well, actually, we can learn out some additional wisdom and even additional laws from every time that God includes this word S in the Torah. Nothing is in the Torah by accident. There's no extra words. There's no extra letters. There's no extraneous anything. So if this word seems to be just a grammatical, necessity of syntax, it's not only grammatical syntax, it must have an additional meaning. And so he went through the whole Bible and he attached or found or derived additional meanings every time this helper word S came up. However, when he came to the fourth book of the Torah, Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, and he came to chapter 10, verse 20, and it said, and I just want to have it in front of me. I looked it up before. Where am I in Sepharia? Hold on. Thought I had, yeah, here it is. Chapter 10, verse 20. Okay, so the verse is, you must revere the Lord your God. Only him shall you worship. To him shall you hold fast, and by his name shall you swear. So it's kind of re-emphasizing that there's only one God in the world. We're only going to worship the one God. We're going to look to God, for everything as the center of our faith, of our life and faith, and really the center of our life and everything that we do in this world. We're going to acknowledge, thank, and praise our Creator. But specifically here, right, so we have these two commandments. They go together. They're repeated many times in the Torah. We say off every day, you shall love the Lord your God, right? Ve'ahavta es Adonai Elohecha, right? You shall love the Lord your God. And here it says, you shall be in awe of the Lord your God. You shall fear. Fear is not a good translation, gets a bad rap, the word fear in English. But really it's you shall have awe of the Lord, right? It's like you shall keep the fact that you were created for a reason, that God made the world and is fully present in it. That needs to be part of your consciousness. But here, the way that's said, I'll read it directly. Es Adonai Elohecha tira oiso ta'avod uvo. Right? So Es Adonai, right? Es Hashem. I shouldn't be saying the name of God, so now I'll switch to Hashem. Hashem is how we, substitute for the four-letter name of God. And we say Hashem means the name, right? But it says Es Hashem Elokecha tira. Right? So again, this word es is because the object comes first. Right? Now, God is the object of the verb be in awe of. Fear, but be in awe of. But the first word of this verse is this es, which doesn't mean anything, right? And so in a sense of like, to God shall be your awe. But it's not T-O. It's just part of the Hebrew. That means you shall have awe of God. And the S is necessary to say that. Well, when this sage, Shimon HaAmasoni, came to that use of the word S at the beginning of a verse about fearing God, and some say it was Nehemiah ben Amasoni. So when he came to this verse, Deuteronomy 10:20, he withdrew from his method of exposition, and he said to himself, as how could one add to God himself? This is an all-encompassing command, right? You shall be in awe of God. We have elsewhere in Proverbs, the beginning of wisdom is to fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? You're actually supposed to say that every morning. So he's like, well, what additional meaning am I going to take from that? It's complete. I can't add to that. You shall have awe of God. If I'm going to try to have some other meaning to it, it's like I'm going to somehow impinge on the oneness of God. And he said, you know what? I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to leave this alone. And in fact, I'm going to stop, adding meanings every time this word es comes up in the Torah. So his student said to him, wait a minute. So what about all the other times that you added in it? You found additional meanings and laws in the verses of the Torah when this word es came up. I mean, there were, hundreds, maybe thousands of times stretching all the way back to the very first verse of the Torah, Genesis 1:1. What about all the other times that you found meaning? And he answered them, he said to them, well, just as I receive reward for the interpretation, all the other times I found the meaning in the word es, so I shall receive reward for my withdrawal from using this method of exposition, which is such a beautiful teaching, right? I mean, it is 100% the nature and the mandate of the sages to look into the Torah and to just parse out, additional hidden meanings out of every word and every letter in the Torah. And they can't just do it willy-nilly. I mean, this took tremendous training, decades of training, and everything that they found, was all peer-reviewed. They would, just toss it back and forth and debate with great passion what they were finding in Scripture. And, not every interpretation was accepted by the colleagues or worthy of being recorded in the Talmud, etc., but so many were. But here he's saying, so I will be rewarded for finding all this additional truth and beauty and meaning in all these other uses of the word up until now. But I will also be rewarded by realizing that I've come up against the mystery of God. This is mysterious, and I am saying it was meant to be mysterious. Shimon Hamasoni was saying that. He's saying, I can't solve this mystery, and he was thinking it was time to stop trying to understand that mystery. And it's such a beautiful lesson, right? It is the nature of the human to want to know, and think how much more we know now, than our primitive ancestors way back, so many generations ago. We've learned so much. And we all know that, there's some things there are mysteries of the universe that certainly haven't been open to us. But there's a tendency, I think, of people to say, well, we don't know yet, but, we will know one day. We don't have a big enough telescope. We don't have a fast enough spaceship. We don't have whatever. We don't have the proper scientific equipment, but eventually we'll know. And if it can't be known, then it's not worth knowing. And it's not like that, right? When one lives a life of faith, one comes up against that final wall, which is God created the world in such a way that God's presence is hidden in this world, that there is a mystery about what happens after we die, and what is the world of souls, and what is the reward and punishment. There's a lot that we've been told by our tradition, but there's a lot that we don't know, and that we're not going to know, and that our sages don't claim to know. God is mysterious by design, right? God made it that way. So there's a limit to how much we can know, and we need to be comfortable in the mystery of divinity. And I think we can learn that from that little word. And of course, what's interesting about that little word, it's Aleph Taf. It's the first and the last word of the Hebrew alphabet. This meaningless word that just connects a transitive verb to an object so that the syntax makes sense is made out of Aleph Taf, right? The first and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it just contains mysteries, and it's the holy tongue for a reason. All right, let's go to questions and comments. Emily, what is the difference between the Noahide Laws and the Ten Commandments other than the number? Well, the main difference is that the Ten Commandments were given to the Jewish people, right? So God spoke at Sinai and said to the Jewish people, you shall have no other God beside me. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other God beside me. And then a bunch of other commandments, but included among them, we've come to think in this kind of, Judeo-Christian culture that they were given to everybody, but they weren't, right? I mean, if another religion, I know so little about Christianity, I'm absolutely incompetent to comment about anything in Christian doctrine. What I can tell you is that when God said, you shall observe my Sabbaths, you shall keep my Sabbath, I have blessed the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is holy. He's talking about Shabbos and all kinds of laws about refraining from work. And, we spent 250 days studying the laws of Shabbos and Eruvin, which is all about Shabbos. All of those laws were for the Jewish people, right? So if another religion comes along and says it's going to have a Sabbath as part of its religion, that's all well and good, but that's not what the Ten Commandments is about. The Ten Commandments are commandments to the Jewish people. So what are the Noahide laws? The Noahide laws are commandments to the Jews and the non-Jews. They are commandments that God gave to all humans. All humans are commanded in the Noahide laws. Not everyone lives a Noahide lifestyle. But the 7 Noahide laws are sort of the key to having a place and a good place in the world to come. And like I said, they sound simple, don't murder, don't steal, have courts of law, etc. But to properly fulfill them, you have to properly understand them. And to do that requires so much, a lifetime of study. There's endless to learn about it. And what's beautiful is that Torah study thus becomes available to the whole world, right? Because if you're going to talk about, who is the creator, why was the world created, right? That's not a Jewish story. The Jews came along much later. But the world was created and humans were placed in it, and the humans were sinful, and there was a reset with the flood, and then Noah came, Noach in Hebrew, but Noah and his family, and after the flood, we are all descendants of Noah, and that's why they're called Noahide laws. They're the 7 laws incumbent on all humans. Bill, oof, gotta admit, not looking forward to the Every Scene's director's commentary on the movie of my life, Have Mercy, O Lord, etc. Nina shared that with me from a commentary by Victor Miller on last week's Torah portion, where he was talking about Reuben, the oldest of the 12 brothers. When like the other brothers wanted to murder their brother Joseph for being so annoying. And Reuben at least said, look, he's our brother. Let's not kill him. Let's just throw him into a pit. And his intention was to come back later and rescue their brother Joseph and bring him back to his father. Of course, before he could come back, the brothers sold him into slavery, and that's how Joseph ended up in Egypt, and that's how eventually the Jewish people ended up spending hundreds of years in slavery in Egypt. But Rabbi Miller's point was that if Reuben had realized that all his deeds are recorded in a book, and that means that everyone, can relive that experience like we do in the Bible, but everybody's deeds, all of them are recorded in this book that has all the deeds of everybody, and that's accessible in the world of souls to God and to the angel and to all the other souls, right? Now, they're going to be pretty forgiving in the sense that anybody who lived a human life is going to make all kinds of terrible mistakes. But what a useful thing to remember, that like every choice I made is going to be like an open book to everybody over there, and like everybody's going to, and I'm going to be sitting there and we're all going to watch the choices that I made. If having that thought helps us to make good choices now, that's a great thing to think about as we live our lives. Lynn, some cowboys fry, wait, what is this? Wait a minute. Oh, and so just tying that thought back, that Reuben, if he had thought that he needs to, that everyone's going to watch him do that, he wouldn't have just planned to come back and rescue Joseph later. He would have said to his brothers, "You're not going to do that. You're not going to do anything to him. He's our brother." And he would have picked up his young brother Joseph, who was about bar mitzvah age at the time, put him on his back and carried him home to his father, right? So many of us, so many bad choices we've made. If we really, absorbed, internalized that all of our deeds are visible to everybody, we'd be, if we realize, fully internalize that all our deeds are transparently known to everyone in the world of souls, there's so many things that we would do better. We'd be so much more heroic. So, let's just do it. Let's just do it. Lynn says, some cowboys fry and eat the testes that have been harvested when castrating cattle. Is that eating a limb of a living animal? Yeah. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that if you're eating anything that's taken off a living animal, like, it's not kosher. It can't be. I would have to be sure to look it up, but it cannot be that that's going to be permitted to Jews. perfectly permissible to non-Jews. They're not doing anything wrong. Oh, wait a minute. I take it back. What are we talking about? The question you're asking me is this prohibited to a Noahide as a limb torn from a living animal? And therefore it has nothing to do with kosher slaughter. It just shouldn't be for anybody. That's a great question, Lynn. I don't know. I mean, it seems like on the one hand, well, it's not going to kill the bull. They're just doing the job of castrating the bull. It's just a regular routine procedure for cattlemen. By the way, Nina and I watched My Darling Clementine yesterday, the John Ford movie. Wow, incredible movie. Henry Fonda, amazing. Victor Mature, amazing. Sorry to mention that. That's such a good question. That does need further research. I don't know. It obviously doesn't harm the animal that much. On the other hand, I've seen elsewhere that sterilizing an animal, that itself might be violating a Torah prohibition, not one that is enjoined on non-Jews. I don't know. If the testes taken when an animal is sterilized, can a non-Jew eat that without violating the Noahide commandment to no need a limb off a living animal? Lynn, please research that question and get back to me. It's a great question. And finally, Tom, why can't the family of the victim be permitted to sell the meat and the hide? Now that sounds good, right? That would seem like a law that if you presented that in the legislature, people would be like, yeah, they've had a terrible loss. Why not? So we're not fully exploring the laws of the ox that gored. As we said here, just mentioning briefly in passing, there is some financial liability. And it might seem that, well, the person he's not obligated to add money to it. Maybe something can come of that flesh and there's a benefit to the victim and the victim's family. I'm not sure. All that we've seen now is that, it seems like the hide is not permitted for benefit, period. Not to the victim either. That just seems like it would be good policy, but maybe is not consistent with Torah law. I'm not sure. I haven't researched all the laws, and we will definitely spend a lot of time on the ox that gored a human, whether it was habitual or an innocuous ox. So try to remember that question when we come to that part of the law, Tom. It's a good one. That's what we've got for tonight. I'm just going to mention in passing, it's Nina's birthday. So maybe you guys who are still listening should put some birthday greetings over there in the comments. I feel incredibly blessed to be Nina's partner and that she's my partner. She's an amazing wife and mom and an amazing half of the Accidental Talmudist team. So we're all blessed to have her. And may we continue to be blessed to have her teaching Torah and helping us share with the world, till she's 120. That's it. Have a great, great night.